Otters, I hope you're all well and have had a really good Wednesday. I've been in school today, so I'm sorry that story's a little bit later, but anyway, here we go. After that, Beanie's father rushed Beanie, weeping, and Kitty, eyes all goggly with shock and excitement, out of the door. He started the car, face thunderous, as Chapman loaded the cases into the boot. Daisy pulled us all into a huddle for one more hasty conversation. "You mustn't say anything," she muttered to Kitty and Beanie. "Not anything about the Detective Society or its part in this. Deadly secret, remember?" We swore. "But," Kitty began. "Kitty Freebody, I've told you before that I know medieval tortures, and I will use them all on you if you so much as breathe a word of any of this. This is important." "Oh, don't," cried Beanie. "We won't. You know we won't." "You wouldn't," said Daisy, "but Kitty might. She talks." All right, snapped Kitty. "I won't." "I don't even want to think about it," said Beanie. "Poor Mr. Curtis. Poor Stephen. Murder is awful." "Thank you, Kitty," said Daisy, rolling her eyes. "So, Kitty, you won't talk? If you don't, you can stay members of the Detective Society. Minor members, of course. But it's an honour, see?" "I told you I'll stay mum, but I want a badge." "If ever there are badges," said Daisy grandly as Beanie's father ground the engine and glared at us, "you may have one." Beanie and Kitty piled into the car. It crunched wetly down the drive, and then they were gone. It made me feel homesick again, though I was still not sure for where. Though I did know that I desperately wanted to follow them away from Fallingford. After that, Aunt Saskia got into her little car, shedding several scarves and a silver teaspoon in the doorway. She tried to kiss Lady Hastings and missed, or rather, Lady Hastings jerked away. Then Stephen was taken away as well. Daisy and I watched out of the first floor window, and though the monkey puzzle tree was the same as ever, and the gravel drive, the whole world felt different. Now Stephen was below us, being pushed into the black back seat of the police car. Daisy had her arm around my shoulder and her most scornful expression on her face. "He shouldn't have thought he'd get away with it," she said. "He nearly did," I pointed out. "What he was going to do to Daddy," said Daisy furiously. "What he did to you." "He didn't do anything to me," I said quickly. "What about Bertie?" "Up in his room. He hasn't even been playing his ukulele, so I know it's bad." "They were best friends," I said. "I mean, if boys have best friends. Imagine having your best friend trick you like that." "Well, I never would," said Daisy, squeezing my shoulder. "And I should think you'd notice if I tried to anyway. You're far cleverer than Bertie is." I didn't feel very clever then. I didn't feel much of anything. My thoughts were all in a tangle. Stephen had nearly got away with it. We had only solved the case by the oddest, rarest chance. A few minutes more and it would have been Lord Hastings being driven away in that police car. In that moment I wished that I had never come to Fallingford. Inspector Priestley had not left with Stephen. He was still in the house, and somehow I felt very shy. I tried to keep out of his way, but it was no good. We were summoned to the library by Hetty, who looked very excited and curious, and when we arrived, there were Uncle Felix, Inspector Priestley and Miss Alston, standing in a very serious semicircle. The sight made my stomach wobble. It was true. They did all know each other. I was not afraid of Miss Alston any more, now that I knew who she really was, and that she was not a murderer, but I had no idea how to behave around her. I was still nervous of Uncle Felix, though. He seemed so important and official that I didn't like the idea of being noticed by him, and I still couldn't guess what he was thinking. And then there was Inspector Priestley. I wondered if he was cross that we had tried to hide the fact that we suspected I'm going to read that sentence again. I wondered if he was cross that we had tried to hide the fact that we suspected Lord Hastings from him. They didn't speak, and I didn't know what to say. Daisy, of course, had no scruples. "Hello," she said, her chin going up. "Hetty told us you wanted to see us. I suppose we can spare the time. What do you want to say?" Uncle Felix screwed in his monocle, fixing us with his eye, and then he smiled. "Daisy," he said, "you're incorrigible. Good of you to grant us an audience. Yes, we want to speak to you." I must have looked nervous because the inspector said, "Don't worry, you're not in trouble." "Well, of course we aren't," said Daisy. "We solved the murder for you, again. I should think we deserve medals." "Indeed you did," said the inspector, "and in your usual fine style. I don't doubt that we shall be able to get a conviction. However, Uncle Felix put in smoothly, "we need to have a word about certain other facts that you discovered, which have nothing to do with the murder." "Such as Miss Alston being a policewoman?" asked Daisy. She seemed thoroughly delighted to be able to annoy her uncle again without worrying that he might be a murderer. "Yes, Daisy," said Uncle Felix. Miss Alston shifted and coughed discreetly. "And what we must ask you now is that you do not pass on that knowledge to anyone else. It is most important that Miss Livedon, which as I think you know is Miss Alston's real name, is able to continue working on cases such as this without being compromised." "Of course we wouldn't," said Daisy, rolling her eyes. "We're absolutely discreet, aren't we, Hazel?" "We wouldn't ever," I said, nodding as hard as I could. "I promise." "Good," said Inspector Priestley, and he smiled at me in a way that I knew meant he was really glad. I felt comforted. Miss Livedon, smiled at us too. Although she was still in her dull, frumpy clothes, she somehow looked less like a governess and more like a real person. And I suddenly wondered if I could be like Miss Alston some day. Of course, that was silly. Miss Alston had to be able to fit in to do her job, and wherever I go I stand out as utterly different. All the same, I couldn't help imagining it. "Miss Livedon came down to Fallingford on my orders," said Uncle Felix. "From time to time we collaborate with the Metropolitan Police." So he was M, I thought. Everything was falling into place. Miss Alston had been working for Uncle Felix. There had been something about that letter. The person who wrote it seemed to know both Miss Alston and the Wells family. We had been watching Mr. Curtis for some time. We were wise to his schemes, but we needed a few more pieces of evidence to close the case. We hoped that having a policewoman on the scene would help. Margaret had told me that her dear new friend Mr. Curtis was invited this weekend, and I knew I had to act. Unfortunately, he realised what Miss Livedon was up to on Saturday morning. She and I were discussing whether we should bring him in when the murder happened, and then we knew that we had to keep our part in the case quiet. I suppose you thought it might mean I was guilty." I gulped uncomfortably. "Never seriously," said Daisy. "She really is a good liar. When we discovered Miss Alston's police badge, of course, we understood everything." "I must admit," said Uncle Felix, "you were both very clever girls." "Give it 20 years and they'll have you out of a job," said Miss Alston, smiling at him. "Girls, it's been a pleasure to teach you, and to be suspected by you. Criminals ought to be aware." "Thank you," said Daisy. "So they ought." I decided that I liked Miss Alston, or rather Miss Livedon, very much indeed. We went upstairs, and as we passed Mr. Curtis's room, we saw that its door was hanging open and the window had been thrown up. Fuzzy bluish day glowed through it, and it made the whole house feel lighter. The body had gone. The case of Mr. Curtis seemed really to be over at last. Very soon my father heard about what had happened. He called Fallingford on a line that hissed and rustled, and I had to listen to a lot of very upset shouting down the phone. I tried to explain that I was quite all right now because the murder had been taken away. "But another murder, Hazel!" cried my father, sounding as though he was very far away and upside down. "How do you find these things? It's that friend of yours, Daisy. I don't like her." "It's not her fault that someone was murdered in her house," I said. "I can't hear you. I said I don't like her and I don't like all these murders. I want you safe. Do I need to come over and be with you for the next holiday?" "No!" I shouted. "I think I ought to. Yes, I will. I'll take you travelling. I don't like that friend of yours. Did you hear me?" "No!" I shouted again, and then the operator cut us off. The day before we had to go back to Deepdean for the summer term, we had another telephone conversation, this time with Inspector. Hetty called us to the phone as quietly as she could. Daisy's father was still not at all fond of the police, and we knew that he wouldn't like Inspector Priestley contacting us. "Mr. Bampton's confessed," said the inspector. It was what I'd been waiting for, but all the same it gave me a horrible jolt. I almost dropped the receiver, and Daisy had to catch it for me. "He's in prison awaiting trial. Because he's 17, he'll be tried as a minor. He won't face the death penalty." I felt quite dizzy for a moment. I discovered that, although I still couldn't forgive Stephen for what he had done, I didn't want him to be hanged for it. I suppose that makes me terribly weak. But there it is. I was glad. "Oh," said Daisy, as though she had just been told that the weather would be cloudy tomorrow. "I see. I suppose you've taken all the credit again." "What do you take me for, Madam Super?" asked Inspector Priestley. And even in his tinny phone voice I could hear his laughter. "There's a line in my official report that reads, 'Acting on a tip-off from schoolgirl detectives Daisy Wells and Hazel Wong, I arrested Stephen Bampton and solved the case.'" "Really?" cried Daisy. "Not really," I said, coming back to myself with an effort. "It's a joke." "No, not really," the inspector echoed. "But you are both mentioned, although not by name. I've credited you as far as I can. I'm extremely grateful. You saved me from making an enormous and costly mistake. Arresting Lord Hastings for a crime he didn't commit. I'd never heard the end of it." "I think this time we ought to get medals," said Daisy, grinning at me over the receiver. "They're in the post," said the inspector. "Now I must go. Keep up the good work. You really do have a most successful detective society." I thought he was joking about the medals, but it turned out I was wrong. That very afternoon, the post brought a fat parcel addressed to Miss Wells and Miss Wong. Daisy scrabbled it open and shook it, and onto her bedspread rolled 4 shiny silver badges. They said "Detective" on them, and Daisy squealed with excitement. She pinned hers to her blouse, and it winked up at me ferociously. "Now we're really proper detectives," she said with a sigh of happiness. There was a movement in the doorway, and I saw Bertie standing there. He was looking at Daisy and her badge, and his face was quite blank. Then he turned away and shut the door. I couldn't quite bring myself to wear mine after that. I stuffed it down at the bottom of my tuck box and left it there. Got a couple more chapters left, but I think we'll leave that for now, so we'll be finishing it tomorrow. Okay, so I hope you're all safe and well and happy. Any problems, just give me an email and I will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.